Good morning on this Wednesday, June 13th. Thank you for viewing 28storms.com. This is going to be an update covering the developing storm in the eastern Pacific. We very well could be dealing with a tropical storm threatening the Mexican coast as we inch our way into the weekend, and we also have at least some chance of tropical development on the Atlantic side in the extended range. Beginning with the Hurricane Center outlooks, of course we're not expecting anything in the Atlantic over the next 2 days, but all the action is currently situated in the East Pac, where we have two highlighted areas. We're not expecting much in the short term from this first area, being given a 20% chance of development within 48 hours by the Hurricane Center. This is going to be the main one to watch, located to the south of El Salvador. They currently place the odds of development within 48 hours at 50%. I think these probabilities are going to go up in the next day or so, and I have a strong suspicion that we will be dealing with Tropical Storm Carlotta moving northwest toward the Mexican coastline. The standard infrared satellite shows that the initial disturbance out toward the west is struggling due to a lot of easterly wind shear. We don't even see much in the way of convection associated with that system. You don't see those deep reds anymore. But if we go back to the standard infrared really quickly, you can tell that the circulation with the aforementioned storm that has the greatest chance of becoming Carlotta, this circulation looks a lot healthier. And as we switch over to the enhanced infrared, this is where we're seeing the most persistent and deepest convection. If we switch over to the water vapor animation, it looks like the storm has a favorable slot of upper level ridging located above the storm, and there's a weak upper level disturbance located over the Mexican coastline and the Gulf of Tehuantepec. So this is triggering off a lot of southwest vertical wind shear, but this shear is passing just to the north of the circulation envelope of our developing disturbance. If anything, this is only going to enhance the poleward outflow of our storm, so this is a healthy signal for more development over the next 48 to 72 hours. Beyond this time frame, this shortwave trough is expected to begin retrograding more toward the west, which is going to give our disturbance more room and time to develop as it also heads off toward the northwest. The latest wind shear analysis also depicts the pattern quite well. We see that the initial disturbance near 100 degrees west longitude is being inhibited by a lot of easterly and northerly wind shear because it's on the southeast periphery of this large upper level ridge that we see situated near the Baja Peninsula. But out toward 90 degrees west we see a more favorable pocket with very little wind shear and the minor shortwave upper level low or disturbance near the Gulf of Tehuantepec, which is helping to ventilate our system just to its east. The current steering layer analysis for the low to mid-level shows that we have a low to mid-level ridge situated over the Gulf of Mexico, northern Mexico, and southern Texas. This would promote more of a westerly track to the south of the Mexican coastline over the next several days. However, it should be noted that this ridge is fairly weak, and the models are beginning to show that this ridge is going to weaken somewhat, especially over the Bay of Campeche and southern Gulf of Mexico. Thus, that is the reason why we do expect this developing storm to begin moving a little bit more toward the northwest with time, and that is why interests here across southern Mexico should be prepping for at least the potential for heavy rainfall heading into this upcoming weekend. And as stated earlier, we certainly cannot dismiss the possibility of this storm developing into a classified tropical storm in a few days. There are now two things to point out on the latest Canadian CMC model forecast. The first one is that this model is becoming a little bit more aggressive with the idea that this storm will in fact develop into a tropical cyclone, but it also appears to be a little bit too fast with the forward motion toward the west, and that is the reason why the storm is not turning into the Mexican coastline like we're seeing with other model runs. It's missing the ridge weakening toward the north, and it moves west in just enough time to where it bypasses that weakness that will soon develop across the southern Gulf of Mexico. To the contrary, the latest run from the GFS model shows the storm moving a little bit slower, and then as we get into the 84-hour time period, the storm barrels straight into the Gulf of Tehuantepec and surrounding communities there along the Mexican coastline, more than likely as a tropical storm as that weakness develops across the southern Gulf and pulls this developing area of low pressure northward. Turning to the 48-hour forecast from the ECMWF, you can see that the model is latching onto this developing tropical cyclone better with each run. Here it is located to the south of Mexico, and as we advance into the 72-hour period, it is strengthening and becoming much better organized. It's actually a rather small and well-organized developing storm as it makes its way toward the coast. So it looks like Saturday morning is the general time frame that the center of circulation will be making landfall or coming very close to the coastline at the very least. So the best advice I can give at this time is for anyone living anywhere close to the Gulf of Tehuantepec here along the Mexican coast, you need to be prepared for this storm to develop into what is likely going to be Tropical Storm Carlotta by Friday or Saturday. So gusty winds, high tides, rough seas, and potential mudslides, especially in the higher terrain, are all possibilities, and the Hurricane Center will be warning on this system if it in fact does develop. Now, for all interest in the Atlantic Basin, it looks like it will be our turn to begin monitoring the tropics as we get into the day 5 through 10 period. And we're going to start off with the latest HPC surface analysis forecast for day 3. As I've been stating for the past several minutes, we will have a weakness moving into the southern Gulf of Mexico in the form of a cold front, and the HPC does have this analyzed sweeping through the Bahamas and even the Yucatan Peninsula, and it almost connects with our tropical cyclone that they have progged to be around this general location. And as we go into days 4, and actually this is now day 5, they have a developing area of low pressure in the western Caribbean just to the south of this front. So all of the best low-level convergence is going to switch over from the eastern Pacific and start moving on into the western Caribbean. And as we go into day 7, sure enough, we have a broad area of low pressure with a stalled out cold front over the western Cuban coastline. And so this is a recipe for at least a little bit of mischief beginning to develop somewhere near the Yucatan Peninsula. The following is the 7-day Theta E forecast at 850 millibars from the GFS model. And all of this is just fancy terminology for saying that this is a measure of the temperature and moisture content. And as you can see, it's rather high across the eastern Pacific, and this is a lot of fuel for tropical cyclone development. But over the next 7 days, you'll steadily notice that all of this begins to transition more so into the western Caribbean, and that is going to be the main area that we start to watch for in terms of any development here going into the extended range. The day 9 sea level pressure forecast from the CMC model certainly shows some active weather beginning to develop across the northern half of the Yucatan Peninsula, and into day 10 it actually significantly develops this storm into a tropical storm or almost even borderline category 1 hurricane. But keep in mind, this is a 10-day forecast from one of the more inaccurate global models. However, if we return to the GFS for just a second, this is the sea level pressure forecast for early Monday morning or Sunday night. You can see the pressure is already down to about 1005 or 1006 millibars right off the Honduras and Nicaraguan coast. And if we continue to advance into days 6 and 7, you'll see that much like the Canadian CMC, it is steadily taking this broad area of disturbed weather across the Yucatan Peninsula and finally into the southern Gulf of Mexico as we go into days 8 and 9. So at least there is some model consistency this far out. And finally, if we make one final return to the ECMWF model solution beginning at day 3, we initially see our tropical cyclone in the eastern Pacific shortly before making landfall. Thereafter, we really don't see much in the way of any tropical cyclones on the map through at least day 6 and day 7, but a broad area of low pressure begins to form and move northwest from the Honduras coast toward the Yucatan Peninsula. And as we go into days 8 through 10, much like we saw with the CMC and GFS models, the pressure begins to lower down to 1006 millibars. And finally, by day 10, we at least have a 1006 millibar tropical area of low pressure to the southeast of Brownsville. So the main concern over the next 3 to 4 days will be the impacts along the Mexican coastline from the developing storm in the East Pacific. Thereafter, we'll just have to see how things pan out near Central America, and part of that is going to be dependent on what actually happens in the East Pacific over the next 72 hours. So there's a lot of things that we'll just have to monitor over the next week in terms of any down the road potential. So thanks again for viewing 28storms.com. Don't forget to follow us on our Facebook and Twitter accounts along with the Hurricane Tracker app for more daily video tropical weather updates.